a graduate from University College of Medical Sciences, and sir is a postgraduate from Vallabhbhai Patel Chest Institute. He is the first chest physician pulmonologist to have his own bronchoscope in South Delhi. There is not one hospital in South Delhi's map which sir has not been a consultant to. At present, finally, sir has decided to settle down in Moorchand Hospital as senior consultant pulmonology and a senior critical care and intensivist. Most of us have benefited from his advices and from his association as far as COVID is concerned, me included. Dr. P.K. Mangla is a wonderful human being, always at hand and available for anything that we personally feel in our life which even remotely relates to chest. Most wonderful thing about him is that he is a very learned physician. Because of his attitude towards life and webinars, he has gathered a huge bank of knowledge with which he benefits everyone whenever needed. I very proudly introduce Dr. P.K. Mangla to all of you. Most of you know him very well. And over to you, Dr. P.K. Mangla, sir, to introduce Dr. N.M. Parashar and the topic.
Good evening, Dr. Chauhan. Thanks for making me the chairperson for this talk. To come straight to the topic, you see, the topic is mucormycosis. We know that it's a fungal illness. I'll just give a small brief and then introduce Dr. Parashar. It's a fungal illness, and we know that fungus is ubiquitous, but it does not attack the immunocompetent people. I have just seen 1 or 2 cases prior to COVID, and even in the second wave, none of my patients developed COVID because I was this mucormycosis, because I was quite miser in giving steroids. I was not giving steroids in heavy doses. Maybe that is the reason. But we have seen cases in which, people received less steroids, 5 days, 7 days. Even those people developed mucormycosis and were lost. That means this virus is doing something to the immunity, and the person becomes immunosuppressed. Besides the hyperglycemia, steroids, and being on heavy antibiotics, being on ICU for a longer period. So this mucormycosis attack, I'll just mention one case. A gentleman, 35-year-old from Jaipur, came to Delhi. He just had COVID and he had received 5 to 7 days of dexamethasone with an eye swelling. And he was fully conscious, alert. MRI and all the scans were done. He had sinuses involved and there was involvement of the eye. And he was planned for surgery the next day. But overnight, you see, he developed some headache and CNS symptoms. And the repeat MRI in the morning showed that the whole brain was knocked out and this man was lost in less than 24 hours of admission. So that is the deadly thing. We know the treatment part is the surgery and giving chemotherapy. Amphotericin, the drug of choice, especially the liposomal, but surgery, if there is a disease, you have to sacrifice the eye. If the eye is involved, it has to be a radical surgery combined with the chemotherapy. Then only there is a chance of survival of these patients. And some of the patients we found that their oxygen requirement was very high and they complained of the sinus pain, and the endoscopy showed that they had mucus. Once they were treated only with posaconazole, their oxygen requirement also came down. I think Dr. Parashar will be discussing this topic in detail. Dr. Parashar is a close friend, and as such, regarding ENT, he is one of the persons in whom I respect from the core of my heart, because he is such a knowledgeable and competent person that whenever I am sending my patients for ENT opinion, I am thoroughly satisfied. And there is no hanky-panky, and he gives a straight opinion, and an amazing surgeon, what Dr. Parashar is. And he is a consultant at present to the CSRI and Apollo Clinic. Dr. Parashar, please.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction, and thank you for the Physician Forum of India for inviting me for this talk. Well, we have chosen a topic which is current and topical in the present circumstances. We are in the aftermath of COVID, the second wave, and almost at the beginning of third wave. So, without beating about the bush, let me go ahead and start. The topic is
Lalit,
Follow. And
Lalit, I just request everyone to kindly mute themselves. Otherwise, there is a lot of background noise coming always. So to get the best out of your talk, I request everyone with folded hands to mute themselves.
let's see who else is on. It is rude for us to mute everyone. Please, everyone, mute yourself so that your adventitious noises don't come out through the mic. So now I go ahead with the presentation. I am of course Dr. Parashar. We are in the aftermath of this second wave of COVID-19 and we are all suffering, and the present suffering pertains to mucormycosis, which is a fungal infection. I present with a case study that there is a 73-year-old female patient who happens to be mother of one of my friends. She presented with history of COVID illness in the May, and in the early June she presented with the history of diabetes. She had an old history of diabetes also, and she had obviously taken steroids to ward off the hypoxia. So now she presents with the right-sided facial pain. One-sided facial pain is an important thing. Nasal blockage, nasal discharges, which are blood-stained ulcer and dental pain. So this troika should always raise the alarm, and straight away from the OPD itself, we sent a KOH stain biopsy. Inside the nose, we were able to see blackish crust and tissues seen in the nasal cavity over the turbinates, which were blackened, and the nasal mucosa. And the immediate CT scan, which we can get in the 15 minutes flat, we could see the sinuses, right side ethmoid sinuses, right side maxillary sinus, and the turbinate. All this, and of course, we had a pre-existing septal deviation. The same
can't see the presentation, sir.
You can't see the presentation?
सर आपने अभी किया नहीं है, शेयर नहीं किया है.
Okay, I'll go back.
नहीं सर, शेयर करिए ना पहले.
Let me see. Go back again. So here we go.
हमारी स्लाइड नहीं आ रही.
अभी आ रही है, एक मिनट में आ रही है.
हाँ सर, अभी आ रही है. सर रीस्टार्ट कर दीजिए सर, पहले स्लाइड करते हैं.
अभी करते हैं.
आ गई.
Now we are there.
Yes sir.
Start. अभी कर रहे हैं. Now everyone is visible. Everything is visible. So the template I have chosen it. The template for the slide which I have chosen it from the Physician Forum of India. I think you can all appreciate this logo of Physician Forum of India, which is dear to us. And of course, going back to the slide. Yes, so this is the first slide, post-COVID tsunami as we were talking about. And this was my first patient was a 73-year-old lady who presented with history of diabetes and facial pain. This right-sided facial pain and nasal blockage was a basic problem. So blood-stained nasal discharge should always alert us. Dental pain and nasal blockage in a post-COVID patient should always alert us to the possibility of mucormycosis. Inside the nose, we were able to see the black crust and the tissue seen on the right nasal cavity. Left was okay. So in the coronal sections, we can see ethmoids just next to the eye are all heavy grey tissue. Similarly, is the maxillary sinus. So CT scan is important in this case, and we can see pre-existing septal deviation. And things are seen over here in the right side. Left nasal cavity seems to be alright. Left nasal cavity as well as the maxillary sinus seem to be alright. You can always interrupt me and ask if anyone wants anything to know. We already had a team of multidisciplinary people in there, so physician, pulmonologist, ENT specialist, maxillofacial surgeon, they're all on the same page. We always have a disciplined approach to this. So it was decided to take up the patient for septal palsy next day morning with the endoscopic sinus surgery as a plan and debridement as per as possible. What we did was septoplasty to make more room in the nasal cavity, and then we were able to do the debridement. Findings were that we were seeing blackish discoloration all over. The necrotic tissue over the right inferior turbinate seen debrided, necrotic tissue over the septal mucosa, uncinectomy done, middle meatus. So these are all steps for us. Important thing for us to know is that we have the potassium hydroxide mount, that is 10% KOH near you send. You send the thing from the nasal, first biopsy you take and send it to the lab for immediate processing, as well as we send a specimen for histopathology examination. So inside the nose, you can see the findings is all blackish things we see inside. They also have running pus from under them. So once you remove them, you see more pus coming out. eventually you can see this is more and more pus in the nasal cavity, and we have to keep on debriding till we see all over bleeding areas, that is all the dead necrotic tissue including the bone, mucosa, cartilage, everything is removed, so that we leave a white live tissue around and take away all the necrotic tissue away like you do in the gangrene. Investigation of the post-mutation method said we were able to see aseptate fungal hyphae. Now remember this term, aseptate fungal hyphae. When you see fungal hyphae, there can be septate or aseptate. Aseptate goes in favor of mucormycosis. Similarly, in the histopathology, it was consistent in mucormycosis. Sinonasal tissue with acute and chronic inflammation, which is a hallmark in the nasal cavity, plus necrosis and presence of broad branch aseptate fungal hyphae. Now, branch again is an important marker because branching is at perpendicular rather than acute or obtuse angle. So treatment is osaconazole in those days and amphotericin B. These were height of the epidemic and therefore we were not getting easy availability of amphotericin B. So initially we had to give osaconazole also, but as soon as we got hold of amphotericin B, that is a drug of choice, so we reverted back, and of course underlying control of diabetes mellitus goes a long way in controlling the mucormycosis. So this patient, we had a happy outcome. This patient symptomatically improved. She is gone home now. She is good post-operatively, continuing on the oral osaconazole. So verdict is that she survived. She is happy. But all the people have not had this happy outcome in the past. We have been in it all over the media, so many print media and so many audiovisual media reports about epidemic. Within epidemic, we are having this, everyone teaching us from rooftops that what is black fungus about and what is we have been having. So one thing to take away the misnomer, black fungus, it is actually not a black fungus. Black fungus is a term referred to rhizopus, which is seen in the sugar cane or onion occasionally you would have seen. Basically, anything exposed in the environment which is wet and in rainy season, we see the bread also getting mold. That is either white or grey or green or black. So black fungus actually is a misnomer for this particular position. The black fungus, I was told, was a name given by one of my ENT colleagues, Gangaram. He wrote an article for Times of India and there he used the term black fungus basically mistakenly for the extra formation or for that blackened skin or necrotic tissue we look inside the nose. Somehow this name stuck on and everyone is calling it black fungus epidemic. So this black fungus is a long term. There are similar stories from heartland of India like white fungus, yellow fungus, green and some other colored funguses. They are basically like opportunistic to fungus. They are like opportunistic doctors getting some news footage and let's stick to the technical term which is called mucormycosis and not beat about the root now. Mucormycosis we should know because it has been a well-known illness. All those of us who are in the multi-specialty hospitals with the wings like ICU and PCU have been seeing this for a long time. These are caused by fungus order Mucorales. It has got 11 genus and 27 species under it. All of them are referred by the name of mucormycosis. The most important one being the Rhizopus erythus, which is most common worldwide all over the world. There are certain variations. Apo is the Phytomyces variabilis, which is predominant in Asia, and in the Europe continent it is a Leishmania species, which is more common in Europe. And apart from that, there are so many other species which are in the book. Basically, the fungus is under microscope looks very messy and very nice, but this is the idea that this is as a state hyphae you see under the eosinophilic stain, and these are mucorales, non-obligate anaerobes are there, and these are non-septate irregular hyphae with right angle branching. That is the hallmark of this. These are 200 micron in length, so they are not too messy. They can be seen over the slide very easily. This is a resource material where our own Dr. Aruna Lokesh Chakravarti is from PGI Chandigarh. He is a world authority on the mucormycosis. So anyone wanting any further information can go to this article and find it out. It is an angio-invasive fungal infection associated with a high morbidity and mortality. A suspected mucormycosis requires very urgent intervention. It doesn't give you too much time, as Dr. P.K. Mangla very lucidly related that it doesn't give you too much time. You plan something and within hours things can change. So it becomes imperative that we diagnose the thing very fast and then proceed equally fast to treat the patient. These few set of slides will tell us about molecular basis and biochemical cytological basis of how the fungus attacks us. So now basically we have the mucous membranes or the skin, the epidermis or the epithelium over there, and the rest of the world is full of pores, as we know, including our nasal cavity, because that becomes the portal of entry generally. Most of the air we breathe in has mucus in it. Now there is so much of competition inside the nasal cavity that you have got bacteria, you've got other kind of spores. So these mucormycosis spores are not able to gain access to the other side of the basement membrane. So they remain outside, and this is a heavy thin film of secretions over there, which is our savior mostly. Then again, once even if they are able to cross the thing, they can lie dormant inside. Like the mucus spores are very small things inside, and they are simply taken away by the phagocytes in the body, macrophages, as well as the neutrophils aggregate around them, and nothing else is required. There is no specific antibody against the fungus per se. So generally this happens, but occasionally they get to proliferate into a bigger swollen spore, and then they can germinate into hyphae and multiple spores. So this is the thing when actually reaction starts. Our macrophages are able to attack at this time. They can stop the germination further. They can dismantle and derange everything. And similarly, neutrophils, when they are around it, they make a circle around it, they engulf it totally, and therefore disintegrate the whole thing by so many proteins, and therefore neutrophilic proteins are able to lyse and eat away all the spores. Very occasionally, some spores are able to cross into the blood vessels, that is from the submucosal or subcuticular plane. They can go into the blood vessels of the area, and there again we have another line of defense called platelets. They aggregate all around it and disintegrate the whole thing before it becomes too much of a bother for the body. Similarly, the spores which they gain access are again not allowed to germinate further, and therefore we have a happy life all our life. What changes occasionally is that if we have any breach in the continuity of our mucosa in the nose, that is either deviation in the septum or pre-existing illness in the nose, in the present scenario, the oxygen is given by the nasal prongs, and those high flow oxygen causes a lot of dryness and crusting in the nose, and that crust can cause occasional piercings in the mucosal membrane. So nose picking and some other non-specific causes. Especially the antibiotic, unnecessary antibiotic usage will take away all the other competitive organisms from the nasal cavity, and therefore spores will have a field day to easily cross over onto the other side of the basement membrane and get to the submucosal plane. Another set of circumstances conspire when we have diabetic ketoacidosis, the acidotic environment, as well as hyperglycemia. Now this is an environment which is very conducive to the growth of mucus. These mucus have in their hypha, there is a ketone reductase enzyme available to them. So ketone, which is otherwise harmful to everything else, but it becomes food and fodder for them. They can easily convert ketone into good food, as is the hyperglycemia. Similarly, this set also causes problems with the macrophages. Macrophages are no more able to identify the spores, mycosis spores, and they are not able to phagocytose it, and therefore all these actions are deranged, and therefore they get time to germinate and proliferate into colon and further hyphae. Similarly, in the COVID-19, so many other things are going on. One is the cytokine reaction of the body. There are two ironies over here. One is that body's own mechanisms, which are supposed to prevent the problem, are the ones which are taking life of people. So people who have got more robust immune system are the ones having more robust cytokine storm and therefore losing life. People with lesser robust systems are surviving. But once they survive that, again the other problem is that we have to give steroids, we have to give steroids which decrease the body's own reaction, as well as hyperglycemia of the neo-formed diabetes. Both these things, apart from the IL-6 and IL-10, that is the interleukins, they have a rise. Similarly, the corona epidemic is causing T-cell exhaustion. And therefore, all these functions of the nucleus will also get deranged, the aggregating function, and therefore it is not able to save our body from the wrath of this mucus. So what happens is the mucus is still there, it is proliferating, but still it has to get the key to get into the endothelial system. Over there, the basic propensity of the virus has a peculiar thing called GRP protein. This GRP is glucose phosphoprotein 78. This has got propensity for the similar endothelial cell. So this key allows the hyphae as well as the pores to cross over the endothelium into the main bloodstream. Similar is high iron state. That is the key which provides the hyphae with the almost entry into the bloodstream. And of course, hypercholesterolemia, we know, is a state which was brought in by the COVID-19, and therefore this high circulating iron allows both the forms of mucormycosis, hyphae as well as the spores, to enter the bloodstream. And moreover, another set of circumstances, that is the platelets, are not able to function properly. There is thrombocytopenia because of so much of thrombosis all over the place. Then antiplatelet factor 4, which otherwise neutralizes the spore, is not working properly. Similarly, steroids suppress the platelet function as well as cause thrombocytopenia. And of course, there are other platelet inhibitors in the circulation. All these factors conspire to cause lot of damage to the flow of the blood, and therefore there is a lot of thrombosis and ischemic necrosis all around. So under the shadow of COVID, 4 set of circumstances: the breach in the mucous membrane, the diabetic ketoacidosis, which is either neo-ketosis or pre-existing diabetes, hyperglycemia, along with the cytokine storm and hyperiron state. All these 4 conspire to cause this wrath of mucormycosis. So again, saying the same thing, this triad of hypoxia, hyperglycemia, and ketoacidosis. This is the thing which is causing us the problem. And moreover, this fungus has ketone reductase system, so therefore it is able to very easily eat away the ketone body in the thing. Ketoacidosis decreases the inflammatory response of the body, as we have alluded to. There is another particular thing called antifungal inhibitory factor. It is not an antibody, it is simply inhibiting the growth of the fungus. This is normally dialyzable thing in the serum, not found in the diabetes. Summarizing the whole thing, from the nasal mucosa, the spores are able to proliferate and germinate into hyphae and in the submucosal planes. They go on to from the submucosal planes into the blood vessels, that is mainly arteries, but also in the lymphatics and veins. And from there, they are able to cause a major arthritis and thromboembolic phenomena in the vascular occlusion. Once there is occlusion, there is ischemia, there is coagulative necrosis, there is hemorrhagic necrosis, there is infarctions and endothelial venous damages, leading on to aneurysms, which are basically taking the fungus to all over the body, and then of course to the aneurysm. All this leads to gangrene of the part, and it has to be dealt with the same way. And surprisingly, to all this, there is very small lack of, there is very severe lack of inflammation, very small inflammatory reaction to all this, and therefore we suffer. So from the nasal mucosa, the hyphae both are able to invade freely into the paranasal sinuses. The most involved sinuses are immediately in the vicinity of the nasal cavity, that is the maxillary sinus and the ethmoidal sinuses, and then via nasolacrimal duct they can travel to the orbit. Even from the ethmoids and maxillary sinuses, they are intimately in contact with the orbit. Therefore, it is very easy for the neutrophils to get into the orbit and cause inflammation and damage there. From all these sides, they travel to the brain, towards the brain also, to lead to intracerebral infarction. It can go via sinonasal areas like to the cerebellum plate, from ethmoid and sphenoid sinus, which are intimately in the base of skull. Similarly, from the retroorbital region, that is superior orbital fissure or orbital latex as we call it, they can travel to the intracranial route, intracranial areas via either vascular route or simply direct contiguous involvement. And of course, there can be hematogenous route once the infection is more well entrenched. So the risk factors known for mucormycosis have been diabetes mellitus is the risk factor present in more than half to even 80 to 90% of the patients with the mucormycosis. There are of course other over the ages, other things are hematological malignancies and immunocompromised patients of any kind. It can be acute myeloid leukemia, myeloplastic syndrome, hematopoietic stem cell transplants, where we suppress the immunity somehow, and acute lymphoblastic. And then of course there is a group of solid organ transplantees. Increasingly we are having more and more people. In fact, in the civilized world, these are the cases which account for most of the mucormycosis. There are other risk factors like tuberculosis, like renal failure, iron overload we have alluded to. Rhizopus species especially has a propensity to attack the iron and use it to enter into the blood vessels. Just for cement therapy, which is sometimes used as a chelating agent for this. HIV infections mercifully, which has been under control, otherwise these patients are coming with this also. Then IV drug abuse, low birth weight infant, malnutrition, all the states where body is not acting like a good human state, rather body is vulnerable to so many infections from outside, which are opportunistic infections. The annual prevalence is estimated to be about 10,000 worldwide, excluding India, and if we include the Indian patient, under the diabetic epidemic we were having before even the COVID epidemic, it was about nearly 20,000. So total 30,000 patients all over the world to begin with, even before that corona epidemic. We have a classification of mucormycosis based on the anatomical sites involved. It can be rhino-orbitocerebral, which is what we had talked about. Then, of course, it can reach the lungs and cause pulmonary mucormycosis. It can be gastrointestinal, cutaneous, renal. We will take one by one. The most important, most common one is this one, the rhino-orbitocerebral. Starts the nose because total of entry is nose or mouth. So most of the spores gain access to the human body via these two places. And then over there, the generalized symptoms are fever. The predominant symptoms in about half the population is fever, headache, facial swelling, and facial pain. This we are talking about mucormycosis in general. We'll take the specific post-tsunami, post-COVID mucormycosis in the subsequent slides. So what this presents is as a nasal discharge of some kind, epistaxis, sinusitis, nasal ulcerations, and perinasal paresthesia. This is very important presenting diagnosis. If we can pick up this, the area around the nose feels strange or different from one side to the other. Like we see the cotton wisp test on the face or the cranial nerve involvement and sensitivity. This can be very useful in picking up the early patient of mucormycosis. Then again, inside the nose we can see the presentation. You can see the skin around the nasal cavity having discoloration. Similarly, in the orofacial sign, the mucosa is gone and you can see the ulcer eschar. There can be loose teeth, there can be bare bones available over there near the teeth. That can be palate, which can be either black or white. There can be petechiae, you can see. Facial nerve dilation, bone destruction, you can see underlying. Ophthalmic sign again become very important. There can be just small one-sided red eye without any involvement of the other side, but it can be decreased the vision. It can be ophthalmoplegia, proptosis, chemosis, all terms we are familiar with. There can be orbital cellulitis where the eyes are popping out, and there can be periorbital discoloration either of the skin or in the areas all around in the conjunctiva, and there can be necrosis, situs eye. Cerebral signs again become very sinister, the fever and headache. Apart from that, one can present with the neurological deficit and altered mental status, including coma, loss of consciousness. So this should alert us to a very, very grave possibility from which the person's recovery is actually very difficult. So how do we diagnose? How do we go about knowing more about this by CT scan? There was a controversy in our group also that we should go for CT scan or MRI. Yes, for the ENT specialist, CT scan seems to be the bread and butter. The same patient CT scan we are seeing again, that you can pick up very easily the early signs. Signs are not very well advanced. They can be very minimal signs of mucosal involvement, and we should infer that there is extraordinary amount of pain accompanying this, so it can be a mucormycosis of the sinuses or the orbit or the brain. So it can be mucosal thickening, there can be erosion of the underlying bone, it can be lesions, and there can be destruction of the bone in the nasal septum, that is cartilage, or the bone, and of course in the orbit, maxilla, and the mandible. The magnetic resonance imaging is the one which is required in most of the cases, especially gadolinium contrast MRI. The contrast MRI again becomes a problem at times because the renal function again in such patients is not very good. Generally, this is the one which determines whether the areas have got good blood flow or areas are dying and therefore need to be removed, including the extension of the eye. So this generally determines how much are we supposed to remove and how much are we supposed to leave. Areas which are glowing in the contrast MRI have to be left alone, and areas which are deficient in the contrast, they need to be removed. So we can easily pick up orbital cellulitis, optic neuritis, optic infiltration, bone rarefaction, erosion of the base of skull, cavernous sinus thrombosis, as well as internal carotid artery thrombosis, infarct, and abscesses in the brain. So all these MRI becomes the benchmark. Or these are the eye which is not enhancing, therefore even the medical treatment, amphotericin B will not be reaching these areas, whereas the other side seems to be better off, except that we have to remove the sinuses. So this is how we go about deciding what will stay and what will come out once we have a surgical intervention. Then second is the pulmonary mucormycosis, because lungs are the biggest field. In these situations, the thing is very difficult to differentiate between the COVID involvement of the lung or the mucormycosis involvement of the lung. Hallmark is supposed to be air pressure sign, which is not present in too much of patients. But generally we can see the abscesses in the lung involvement. There can be pleural involvement, there can be multiple nodules, pneumothorax, etc. So Dr. Mangla of course can throw more light on all these. Generally it is unilateral, the lung involvement, but occasionally it can be bilateral also, and of course it can be confined to some areas in the lung. There can be disseminated mucormycosis, as we saw. It can spread via the blood streams, and up to 13% patients can have such kind of disseminated mucormycosis, which again predominantly goes to the lung, but it can also involve the central nervous system, sinuses, liver, or kidneys. The presentation of renal mucormycosis again is fever, blank pain, hematuria or anuria. CT scans and MRIs are able to tell us. Only problem with the contrast is that kidneys may be damaged, and therefore we may or may not be able to give the contrast. Another peculiar thing is a cutaneous mucormycosis. This is seen in the farm workers, especially if they have comorbidities. But in the immunocompromised host, one can have problems even with a small intervention like intramuscular injection. But any penetrative trauma, any open wound, any motor vehicle accident, surgery, all they carry the risk of transmitting the cutaneous mucormycosis, because body is itself not able to defend against the attack of mucormycosis. Out of all the presentations, gastrointestinal mucormycosis is the most difficult to diagnose because the presentations are very not non-specific. Abdominal pain, gastrointestinal bleeding, abdominal distensions, diarrhea. But then, as we just saw in the last 2 days news, cytomegalovirus and so many other opportunities in infections are also staging a comeback. in this the light of this. So this is generally very difficult to diagnose ante-mortem. Bowel is the most commonly involved, which is 43%, stomach 33% and others. In immunocompetent hosts also we can have this about 1.9% incidence of mucormycosis, because after trauma, burn, surgery, any area which is not properly vitalized, if something like bread exposed to the mucor, and therefore it can get infection if the body is not having proper circulation there and therefore the proper defense mechanism. In China and India, there is isolated renal mucormycosis has been reported in apparently healthy individuals without any comorbid disaster. I spent some time on nosocomial mucormycosis because this is associated with the things which we normally use in the hospital setting: umbilical catheters, elastopores, adhesive dressings, wooden tongue depressors, even wooden sticks, osteotomy bags, and then bandages, even contaminated linen. Out of all the places, even in US, up to 42% of the samples collected from the clean linen had spores on it. So hospitals can actually be very bad places for patients, especially if they have underlying disease. In nosocomial and hospital involved, apparently, obviously the most important site is the skin, and then of course gastrointestinal tract, lung and sinuses can be involved, and disseminated or brain even can be involved. So now how to diagnose mucormycosis? This is a difficult thing to diagnose, especially since it is not a very common illness for the most of the small centers on small hospitals. In the multi-specialty hospitals, yes, there is a wing which is dealing with these things, so they are more in the know. Definitive diagnosis we say only when we have microscopic as well as the culture positive. So this occurs only in the 25% patients. The rest we have to go for the clinical feature. So for the microscopic diagnosis, it is mandatory to see under the microscope the branching non-separate hyphae with or without right angle branching hyphae. This becomes a hallmark. This can be done in the OPD setting very easily. Report can come within half an hour and you can straight away go on to the proper treatment. Then of course, the culture from the mucormycosis specimen sent is the pathognomonic. Yes, culture is very difficult, culture is not very easy, but once you are sending it, you have to inform the microbiologist that please, what are we looking for, so that these things are anyway growing in the culture when there is contamination. So they should not throw away that contaminant, they should actually belong to the person. This one, microbiologists have to be alerted to the possibility that we are looking for the exactly the same thing which contaminate your culture. That is the mucormycosis. Then of course clinical features can, in the present epidemic, we can go for the preventive treatment of the clinical features itself. So lab studies basically involve lab which is 10% potassium hydroxide now, maybe up to 20%. This is the ideal. This gives the quickest result. We can see mucorales with the routine lab stains such as amoxicillin and eosin, and they are easily observed by their size, because hyphae are 10 to 20 micron, and length can be up to 200 microns as we say. There can be GGM stain. This is some crystals, Grocott, Komori, methamine, silver, and periodic acid is commonly used stain, and they can show us the non-separate hyphae with the right angle branching quite vividly. Then of course tissue biopsy from any tissue, necrotic tissue, dead tissue, especially from the periphery of the lesion, where you have the junction of normal and abnormal, as we always do the biopsy from there. That can show either as a fresh section, frozen section, or can be permanent section. So permanent sections do become important because we need to document it properly for all times to come. The lot of mutilating surgeries can be involved based on the biopsy and decision making. Therefore, not only the frozen section but the permanent section become a liability and legal protection for you later on. And of course, one can take a biopsy of the artery for proving the diagnosis. The brain heart infusion broth is the one where we send the culture. Even potato, dextrose, agar, and some other things are available where you can get it. with gentamicin, polymyxin B, this will decrease the bacterial count and therefore we can get the spores very easily. But these have to be without the cyclohexamide, and their lab people know how to grow the cultures over there. Then of course there can be PCR system for the Meforase. There can be imaging studies which become the mainstay of the treatment. As far as clinical course is concerned, generally most of the things which we see in the hospitals are subacute cases. There are acute cases which straight away progress on to the morbidity and mortality, and therefore we don't even diagnose occasionally, and so many of them must have been cremated or buried along with the disease. But chronic patients are one which are uncommon overall, but we can still see in the OPDs, whereas subacute ones we see in the hospitals. So management becomes very important because so many things go hand in hand. It's not that one follows the other. We have to go for the early diagnosis, because early diagnosis is the hallmark, the prerequisite to any successful outcome. And then of course the successful outcome also depends on the reversal of the underlying factors, like we saw the diabetes and hyperiron state. So these have to be controlled very fast as soon as possible, including the cessation of steroids. Then again, broad surgical debridement is the thing required to decrease the fungal mass. We'll talk about it. And then of course, the actual treatment for mucormycosis is the antifungal therapy. And of course, for all the decision making, it has to be a multidisciplinary approach with the surgeon, ENT surgeon, the lung specialist, physician, eye specialist, endocrinologist, and facial-maxillary surgeon, all involved in the diagnosis. So, early diagnosis is a very critical factor. Time is important because if you lose it, you lose the patient. The mucormycosis outcomes depend on the early diagnosis. A small focal lesion which can easily be treated, can easily be surgically removed, will go on to become a big lesion if you delay the diagnosis before the diagnosis. So, early diagnosis becomes very important. On the theoretical decision, based on even frozen section or even clinical things, we should straight away go on to start the treatment as early as possible. The correction of the underlying problem, that becomes the hallmark of the start of the treatment, because appropriate control of hyperglycemia is a must. We should also control the diabetic ketoacidosis as early as possible. Immediate tapering of the corticosteroids is required so that we save, but again it may or may not be possible under the circumstances. And similarly, any immunosuppressive drugs which we are using have to be discontinued for the safety of the patient, whether the organ for which they were given in the first place can be saved or not is up to the specialist. Then if some creating agents are being used like dextromethorphan, they have to stop those treatments. So it is critical to achieve a positive outcome by taking control of the underlying disease. Now the management. Rapid initiative of effective and systemic antifungal therapy. Now it has to be very systemic and effective therapy. Polyeins are the mainstay of the treatment, as we know. It is amphotericin B, either in the more prevalent form which was there decades back, the amphotericin deoxycholate. This is supposed to be highly renal toxic, and therefore it's liposomal form. Initially they were lyophilized, that is the liquid solvent material, and then of course there are liposomal amphotericin B available nowadays, which is the first line of management. During the epidemic it was not very readily available, but when available this can be used preferentially in 5 to 7.5 mg per kg per day. We also have to keep looking for the underlying electrolytes, underlying electrolytes, that is potassium as well as renal function and magnesium. All these can go haywire, and therefore we have to decrease the dose and stop. It is never that we are able to give 5 to 7 days of medicine straight away. Every day these findings tell us to stop or decrease or modify the treatment policies. And of course, when possible, when the renal function is alright, amphotericin B, which is much cheaper alternative, can also be given. When the CNS is involved, and there is intracerebral involvement known, then we can go up to 10 milligram per kg body weight. Another thing is that we start with the high dose straight away. We don't wait for the escalation of the doses normally we do. We straight away start with the high dose and take up the renal function and other problems later on. Just going back one step, people have also tried local packing as well as nebulizer of the amphotericin B. There is another system to deliver drug to the nasal and sinus cavities by the nasal nebulizer. So these again have been tried. These are novelties, so not many people know about it as of now. As we are saying that there has to be rapid and effective treatment, antifungal therapy. This is the treatment, but sometimes when the renal function is not allowing amphotericin B, then we have to take help of the azole. Over there, osaconazole has put the test of the time. We can use it. We can use it initially as a single therapy in the intravenous form. Otherwise, it is also available for the long-term therapy as oral forms available. We can give up to 800 milligram per day in divided doses, 200 milligrams, 2 to 3 times or 4 times a day. Success rate is about 60 to 70% with this. And there is isavuconazole, the new kid on the block. This can be used as single therapy. It can be used initially IV and later on in the oral form. Again, these are very costly things. This initial therapy of the isavuconazole is about rupees 90,000 per day, but after a day or two, we can switch on to the oral modes, and there can be 5 to 7,000 or 9,000 per day. Point out is that there is fluconazole and voriconazole don't have any role at all. The surgical management. Now surgical management again becomes important because you take away the massive fungal mass and therefore rest of it can be handled by the actual treatment, which is amphotericin B. We take away the endoscopy in the OPD sitting. OPD can confirm the diagnosis. We can take a biopsy. We can obtain the KOH smears. We can repeatedly follow it up and see, and therefore we can handle the thing more effectively. There can be local irrigations, packing with the amphotericin B, even the chest with the amphotericin B. We can clear the nasal sinuses and drain the whole thing out. The aggressive surgical debridement basically is something like we are doing for the gangrene. To remove all the tissues which is infested with the mucus, and therefore rest of the body will be able to handle by the blood circulation. Actual therapy, which is amphotericin B, will be able to reach the sites, and therefore it will be able to take away. So we are guided by the imaging study how much to remove till the bleeding occurs, till the normal mucosa, normal bone, normal body tissues are seen. Only then we stop our surgery, and of course it decreases the total fungal mass, therefore increases the chances of our recovery. But such a massive scale of surgery leads to a lot of disfiguring, and psychological ramification of those surgeries have to be kept in mind whenever we are thinking of. Now this is my bread and butter, that we can do these kind of surgeries mainly endoscopic in the today's world, and we can remove most of the things, even the near total maxillary via endoscopy alone, and therefore we are able to save the gross deformity. We can also via nose only decompress the pus, decompress the orbit involvement, decompress the optic nerve involvement, and therefore save many an eye which otherwise would have gone into the exenteration. But eventually, in some patients, about 1/5 of the patients, the eye specialist has to take a decision about exenteration of the eye, especially when the orbital apex is involved. So from there, next step is central nervous involvement, and therefore that has to be avoided at all the costs. This is a decision best taken in conjunction with the ophthalmologist. And then of course skull base and frontal bone we have to work. Management of post exenteration, we can see in this patient we had to resolve. These long-term patients are the ones which we saw in the first wave, not after the second wave. But this can be life-saving. Similarly, there can be intracranial surgeries, ophthalmic surgeries we have alluded to. Especially ophthalmologists need to sometimes give retroorbital amphotericin B. Then again, loose teeth and orthodontic intervention, ratio-maxillary restorative surgeries may be required later on. These can be cold cases which can be tackled in 6 to 8 months time later on. Hyperbaric oxygen, again, as we know, hypoxia is a very potent stimulator for mucormycosis. So once you remove hypoxia, our chances of recovery become better, and so many centers are available with hyperbaric oxygen therapy nowadays. How long to treat? Basically, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks of the treatment. We have to see the radiological imaging to know whether clearance is there. The negative biopsy specimen obtained at the end of it will go a long way. And of course, we have to wait for the recovery from immunosuppression. Till then, we have to give some kind of prophylaxis. So prognosis, untreated is only 3% survival. Whereas once you start treating, your success rate keeps on increasing. With the HBOT, it can reach up to 80% with the hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But generally, it is considered 30% mortality and 70% survival in the mucormycosis. That is nowadays. Earlier, it was worse. So this has been increasing in the recent years. So we are coming to the end of it. So I think there are issues to be solved. Annual prevalence is generally we talked about 30,000 patients, but in this present case tsunami, we had about 45,000 cases in the 2 months alone. That was way above the normal, and therefore we were inundated with so many patients. So that patients, we didn't have enough trained labs to detect. In Delhi, when we sent specimen in the nearby labs, most of the labs are not doing it. So we had to request them to do the KOH mount. And then medicines were not available because so much of the patient load was there. And of course, there was loss of life because of delayed detection, because the doctors were not knowing how to detect it. So, in the light of this present epidemic, we have seen the average duration after COVID recovery was about 14 to 18 days. 2 weeks after recovery, the patient presented with a second illness, and this time this illness led to mucormycosis. Most of the patients we saw in the OPD were subacute patients, and then of course some of them rapidly progressed on to the acute fulminant, as Dr. Mangla said. Chronic infection of course is uncommon. So this is the present day scenario, that why the COVID has created mucormycosis. Basically, it was epidemic within the pandemic, and there are multiple reasons about it, why we had it, and generally healthcare suffered, as you recall the days last 3-4 months, even early epidemic. The doctors were finding very difficult to examine the patient. Some doctors were not even attending the OPD. And then again, even when the patient came, doctors were seeing patients from a large distance. I remember having gone to some place, there was a cello tape on the door, patient was outside the door and doctor was sitting inside the door, and that is how dispensation was there. Most of it was teleconsultation, and therefore examination suffered, and therefore the early diagnosis must have suffered. Endoscopies, even we people were not doing endoscopies because it was ICMR guideline that you have to have RT-PCR only then you can do the endoscopy of any kind. And therefore, many a diagnosis must have been missed. The consultation from the distance, teleconsultation, the labs again were overwhelmed. What to talk of hypoglycemic control? Labs are not even able to give you any report. So you were in the dark about controlling the underlying thing, and therefore things like ketoacidosis and iron chelation, etc. were a distant dream in those days. And then of course there are problems like hospital beds, admission, lack of oxygen. Even patients were scared to reach the hospital or doctor or any healthcare professional because of scare of contracting the disease. Therefore, the loved ones were simply treated at home, not being taken to the hospital, and therefore suffered the consequences of delayed diagnosis. So many of the mucormycosis patients actually would have gone to the grave or crematorium without even the diagnosis being completed. So, the huge diabetic population which India anyway has or had before the COVID epidemic per se, steroids added to the fury, and COVID per se causes so-called problems. Then early suspicion of anticoagulant, we have seen, this is a thromboembolic disease itself, the COVID-19, and if we stop the anticoagulants early, it would have led to a lot of thrombosis in the area, leading on to dead necrotic tissue, which is a cannon fodder for the mucormycosis. And iron overload was one of the things. Some people tend to blame humidifiers in the India. Of course, the Western world is not using humidifiers, but in India we have this tendency to use humidifiers. Whether right or wrong, I can't say. But humidifiers were not supposed to be the reason for this because it doesn't travel this way. The humidifier, whether water was contaminated or clean, generally this is not the reason for mucormycosis episode. This is a consensus of the learned people for mucormycosis. Industrial oxygen usage again, although it has got 5% impurities apart from the oxygen, but still it does not lead to mucormycosis. Gym supplements people have been using a lot, and that includes a lot of steroids unknowingly, and therefore that was found to be the reason in many patients. Now the other things in our habit was steam and kala and hot things all the time of the epidemic. These two can actually be incriminated because steam takes away the steam causes a lot of burns in the nasal cavity and oral cavity and even the respiratory tract, and steam has led to a lot of raw areas which would have led to the first breach in the continuity of the mucous membrane. So steam users have got more mucormycosis. This is confirmed by the studies, and similarly the hot gargles and kala people have overdone this and led to a lot of heartburns and problems. But again, it could have led to a lot of mucormycosis in the oral cavity. Then again, the COVID-19, especially the Delta variant, and now we have Delta Plus. This is causing damage to the pancreas, leading to neo-diabetic population, which were not even known to be diabetic, so even doctors were lax in knowing about these diabetics, and therefore the sugar control or hypoglycemic control would have been less than strict in these patients. Then of course, Delta itself causing some problems in the immune dysregulation. We have seen at so many levels this cytokine storm as well as the virus itself leads to problems in the body's defense mechanism, leading on to mucormycosis. So COVID-19 of course is known, like all the COVID, as angiofibrotic thrombotic disease, and this causes a lot of ischemic areas in the body at places known or unknown, leading on to mucormycosis. Now this is a sort of slightly controversial slide, but yes, we have to take a closer look at ourselves. So our management of COVID-19 did we fault in India, especially because bulk of the patients again are coming from India, although there have been reports from the Europe and even American journals of mucormycosis in the second wave. Not adherence to the protocol. India, of course, we are especially notorious. In the Western world, people have not given so much of steroids, so much of antibiotics, so much of other adjunct therapy as in India we do. We typically don't go by protocols, we don't go by our judgment. So I think at some level this might have caused some disease burden. Similar is the irrational use of antibiotics. We have all used lot of azithromycin, doxycycline, maybe ivermectin use is still coming up and it may actually be okay to use. But yes, people have gone not by the rational but by their just inclination. Similarly, the use of fluconazole and voriconazole. Now, once you are using all these broad spectrum antibiotics and antifungals, they will take away the competitive reduction of the mucormycosis population at the surface level, and therefore you become more open to such attacks by the mucor, and therefore fall more for it. So, as anywhere else in the body, excess use of unnecessary antibiotic, unnecessary medication does lead to the problem. It is undebatable, and in the present episode also it would have led to it. Simply the steroid use in India. People have used steroids not indicated right from day one. People have used steroid in the higher dosage than required. The only thing which proved the usage of steroid was dexamethasone, but we have gone on to use methylprednisolone, cephalosporin, anything we laid our hands on, and therefore overall we might have had an excess use of steroids in some good percentage of patients. This is debatable because we in India had the lowest fatality rate, so maybe we owe it to steroid usage by people, so we were able to save more people, but in the process we have had more mucormycosis. This is my take on it, that we had a huge population with a very small healthcare system and even smaller healthcare professionals and doctors, and we had a huge burden to take, but somehow manfully we have managed it so far, and in times to come we will manage it even better. The carry-on message is that after 2 weeks of steroid, after 2 weeks of COVID-19, if the patient comes back with any illness, especially nasal puffiness and nasal symptoms, and there is a history of steroid use, and there is especially pre-existing diabetes, we should be alert to the possibility of mucormycosis. Similarly, we have to strive for early diagnosis. Whenever we have this one-sided facial pain, facial swelling, or perinasal anesthesia, which is one of the very important symptoms, tell the patient to close the eyes and check up on both the sides of the nose whether the patient is feeling same or different. Early diagnosis requires potassium hydroxide smear. Even in the OPD, very easy, the way you take RT-PCR, you take a wet smear, that is with the normal saline, drop it in the KOH drop, and then send it to the lab for immediate processing. We have to treat not only hypoxia and fever, but also treat diabetes and iron state, and therefore this decreases the need for mucormycosis treatment later on. Steroids have to be used judiciously by all. There can be other alternatives to steroids. We have to explore these possibilities. My physician friends can do that. And then of course, maybe we were required to use anticoagulants for a long time after COVID-19. Don't stop it in a day or two. Use it for months at least, or maybe more, and that way decrease the thromboembolic phenomena and the mucormycosis resulting from there. Now there is a carrying on message about prophylaxis. From the Lancet, there is a group of European physicians who have come out with these that we can give tablet prosaconazole 200 mg 3 times a day in all high-risk patients, namely uncontrolled diabetic, immunocompromised patients, neutropenic, in patients with a high cytokine IL-6 count, and then ferritin patients, those with the high CT score, 16 and above, those requiring mechanical ventilation, those on tocilizumab, and those on high steroids. These are the patients which require maybe not only prophylactic prosaconazole, but they should also be on the longer surveillance, about 3 to 6 months, because it is still not very far in the past that we had COVID second episode, second wave, and third wave might be knocking over doors, because patients are rising in India even today. With these words, we come to the end of this talk. Thank you very much. Now we are open to questions. Dr. P.K. Mangala to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parashar, for extensively dealing with the subject. I think you have not left anything. The crux is high index of suspicion, early treatment, medical, surgical. And just for one information, that amphotericin B, I think Dr. Parashar mentioned, is compatible with dextrose, not with the saline or ringer. So one has to be cautious about the potassium, about magnesium, and about the hypoglycemia. And the renal functions are to be closely monitored, and at times, even if they are going bad, it is so deadly, might as well dialyze patients, but treat them whatever treatment is required. I think the house is open for discussion, and Dr. Parashar will be happy to answer all the questions.
Dr. Parashar, sir, can I ask first question?
Pranam, sir, pranam. Yes, definitely, sir.
Sir, so you have touched all the parts, and I'm really so glad, but I had to miss part of it. I would request you to circulate the slides.
I'll do that. I'll do that right away, sir. I'll do that.
Sir, although this is not directly related to COVID, because COVID is primarily acting through ACE2 receptors, and this has nothing to do with that. But it is so much related to COVID because of so many reasons, because of lack of immunity, the steroids, the diabetes, and so many factors, and cellular immunity and all that. Sir, I want to know a few points. One is any biomarker, do you know, which is to give us a suspicion?
None so far, sir. None so far.
None so far. Sir, any vaccine possible?
As of now, no. There is nothing in the literature for that. It is just the treatment part and prevention. The mainstay of the treatment policy for mucormycosis is prevention.
So many people are talking about industrial oxygen being used these days.
No, I did touch on this, sir. This
Yeah,
has been
just
very
wanted to know.
conclusively proved that this is not the way. This is not the case.
Yeah. And sir, role of radiation therapy, if any, because radiation therapy, low dose radiation therapy was used for COVID also.
I agree, sir, but in mucormycosis doesn't have any.
So just to know,
Sir, mucus, sir, again coming back to the basics, Mucor is a spore which is very tightly pinned inside the cell wall. So nothing penetrates it and it is not destroyed by these things. It lies dormant for all time to come. Only when it gets conducive environment, it starts to swell and it starts to germinate, producing hyphae. Only then it is effective in causing the disease. So before that it is lying dormant in a closed environment, the course of the mucus. Therefore nothing affects it from the environment, except when it gets a good environment. Like the seeds we all have, seed is planted in the earth, only then it starts to germinate. Before that it is simply lying dormant.
Got your point, sir. What about nasal nebulizers versus nasal spray? Which one is better and how?
Sir, it is both are for different areas. Nebulizer have the particle size of about 5 micron to 10 micron. So they go into the lungs, bronchioles and deeper lung tissues. Whereas in the nasoneb, that is nasal nebulizer, the particle size attained is 22 micron. So that goes into the nasal cavity and sinuses preferentially, right? So these are intended for different parts of the body altogether, the nebulizers versus the nasal nebulizer.
Just want to understand the spread of mucormycosis. As you said, it spreads. So does it spread through blood? Because it enters the blood vessel. So
Yes, sir, it does.
through blood.
The thromba and polyps.
Does it metastasize?
Yes, sir. It is the disseminated mucormycosis is that only.
Okay. And I don't know why did you prefer to say the survival rate 3% instead of mortality 97%?
That is in the untreated variety, especially if it is able to find the way to the brain. Intracerebral.
So survival 3% sometimes may not catch your eyes. Mortality 97% alarms you not.
Sir,
So,
I'm a doctor, not a news person. It is a newspaper which sensationalized.
Sir, about the use of steroid, as you said, dexamethasone was studied and they have used methylprednisolone. I don't think they matter too much. They matter only as far as the mineralocorticoid activity is concerned. The fluid retention and all.
I agree, but my point was, my humble submission was simply regarding the protocol to be followed. In the West, people have followed the protocol. In the papers, in their writing case histories, they clearly write about the protocol and say that this fits the protocol and therefore we are giving this. In India, we hardly care for protocol. We go by our judgment. Okay? So that is the only difference between how we see and how the people read in the West.
My last question, sir.
Sir.
Take home message about steam and gargles. Steam and especially weight gargles. And there was some rumors that alum gargles, typically, may
Yes,
prevent it.
Even Gentian wallet was used by people for humidification also. These are the things which are not scientifically proven. It was just on a hunch people were using it. Steam, people have overdone it definitely. You know, so many people, almost half the population of India was taking steam too much. Similar was the case with the gargles and kala. We had not only seen the mucormycosis, but we had seen kala people with oral ulcers, with the gastroenteritis, with the liver problems, with the gastritis problems.
Good point, sir. Is Betadine gargle safe in condition 1:3?
Sir, it could be safe for this particular thing, but again, for virus with Betadine gargle is unquestionably good. Only thing is, there is a competitive inhibition of the entry into the body. So once you take away the commensal population by either indiscriminate use of antibiotic or antiseptic, you are throwing the field open to these opportunistic infections.
So Rohingyas aa jayenge.
You take away the local population, Rohingyas are going to come.
My last suggestion to you, can you plan for a robotic endoscopy?
Robotic endoscopy, in future it might be, but presently we were, after initial hesitation of about 2 weeks, we had started doing the endoscopies and therefore I was able to pick up so many of the even first wave mucormycosis patients and therefore they had a happy ending. Second time we never stopped for a day, sir. We knew how to see such a patient. The scare by the government of India and ICMR was gone. Our hands were now no more tied, so we were able to go ahead and do it.
Think for robotic endoscopy, sir. Okay, sir.
I will, sir, that is.
Thank you, Dr.
Parashar.
Dr. Parashar, just very important information
Sir,
will be put
sir.
for us also.
Sir.
First, I must congratulate you for a very comprehensive lecture on mucormycosis. My comment about GI mucormycosis.
Yes, sir.
One information. First case of GI mucormycosis in the world was reported from Delhi, in the world. And
Oh.
he is the first alive case of GI mucormycosis. He is a doctor from Delhi. I will not name him. He is ICU in charge of one hospital. He presented with, and in the first wave, when nobody knew about mucormycosis, in May 2020, he presented with
It shows that pervading ileus in a segment of the bowel, and therefore that has to be restricted, and there has to be anastomosis, something like that.
no, he presented with severe GI bleeding, lower GI bleeding.
Oh, okay.
And on laparotomy, there were multiple perforations in the colon, sigmoid colon, descending colon. Then he ultimately survived. The doctor, I know that doctor, and
I know.
it was reported. Published in the British Medical Journal also, and we are now publishing in Indian Medical Journal also, IMA Journal also. It's very important. I think that was the first case in the world alive mucormycosis GI of the gastrointestinal.
Right, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Parashar, one question. You had said that posaconazole to be used as prophylaxis as
Yes, sir.
600 milligram daily. But for the treatment, we are giving 800 milligram. But tell me one thing, how long will you use for prophylaxis?
So three months, as I say, to 6 months, till you
For
take away
prophylaxis.
for prophylaxis, till you take away the underlying cause, that is either ketoacidosis or diabetic control or the immunosuppressed drug which you have taken, and you have the markers for normal immunity in the body, then only you withdraw the drug.
But 3 months will be a very long period. Will it
Well,
not
sir,
be
patient who require it, they require it, sir. I listed the patient, that the group of people who require it, they have to be in the long-term surveillance at least, if not the posaconazole regularly.
okay?
Lalit, I want to congratulate you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, dear.
It covered almost all the dimensions of mucormycosis. Since Dr. P.K. Mangla sir is there, and one aspect which obviously you did not cover that well enough is the pulmonary mucormycosis.
Agree.
I would like Dr. P.K. Mangla sir to just interject and tell us about the prognosis of pulmonary mucormycosis. Is it as bad as the rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis, or is it slightly better?
Yes, hello, thank you, Dr. Chauhan. We have not seen many cases of pulmonary mucormycosis except the occasional one in which we saw some cavities. They can present with hemoptysis. Any invasive fungus has a very bad prognosis, and those coming to the lungs are likely to involve the nasal sinuses also, and as such the prognosis is not very good. But those patients we treated for nasal or the sinus mucormycosis, and they were treated with posaconazole or amphotericin B, we found that their oxygen requirement improved, and maybe in that way they did better. But certainly if there were cavities and infarction of the lungs, the prognosis was not good.
Sir, I may just point out one thing. When we intervene surgically and remove most of the bony necrotic segments, what we see in the ICU settings is that immediately the patient's tachycardia settles down, immediately the requirement for oxygen goes down, and therefore patient settles into a better health straight away, immediate post-operative period. There is a marked contrast between the pre-surgery and the post-surgery patient. So yes, as you say, oxygen requirement has drastically come down straight away.
Lalit, can I ask you? Can I ask you?
Dr. Chauhan, I just wanted to say something.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ashok.
I just wanted to inform everybody here, the person who developed the amphotericin B liposomal injection 4 variant till emulsion, he was my colleague in Glaxo.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Mr. B. Shrikant Pai, you must have read in the articles also, in The Week and Times, etc. He was my colleague, researcher in Glaxo when I was working in Glaxo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great, Ashok. Lalit, I want to ask you, what is the commonest presentation of mucormycosis post-COVID? What is the commonest presentation?
Sir, the troika of having had a COVID illness with steroid and diabetes and also coming to your OPD with nasal stuffiness, nasal discharges and blood-stained nasal discharge from one side. The most prominent ones where we found the positive thing eventually were unexplained pain. Even I lost a patient where I missed the diagnosis. Patient came with the ear pain and I saw ear was alright. I saw the nose was alright. I saw the throat was alright. So I sent the patient to neurologist. Having taken Maha, GABA-M and gabapentin for some days, he had loose teeth. Then the dentist got the CT scan done of the nose and dentist came to know that it was sinusitis. So this was my failure to diagnose in time. That patient is eventually on proper treatment and is now okay. But then I missed the diagnosis for initial 2 weeks. Okay, so this can happen. This excruciating pain which is not explained by the findings must have go for CT scan and MRI.
Okay, Lalit, I also want to ask you a question. Is now the availability of liposomal amphotericin B
Now it
and
is
the
better.
other antifungal agents, is it better now?
Yes, sir. Dr. Mangala will vouch for it. Now it is better.
Initially, I think because the requirement and the doses are required in enormous amount and so many patients are needing, our patients did not get the complete doses of, but
Initial days, so now it is better.
but I think the patients who received posaconazole, I think they did also quite well.
I agree. That was last measure that we had to give posaconazole, but patients have done well. So we are happy with the posaconazole result.
Lalit, since we have Dr. P.K. Mangala on board here, sir, we are hearing about the third wave, the impending third wave, and the timing is suspect. Some people say August, some people say September, some people say December. Sir, what will be your advice to our all colleagues who are tuned in regarding the use of steroids for the third wave?
Actually, I would say
Mangala,
that, you know, as and when the oxygen requirement of the patient doesn't improve, we were keeping on setting up the doses of steroids. I think beyond a particular dose of Solimetrol 40 milligram or 40 milligram BD, there was no point increasing these doses to pulse therapies and subjecting the patient to more of bacterial infections or fungal sepsis. One has to understand that beyond a particular dose of steroids, there is no benefit. And one should try the new therapies in the form of methylene blue, vitamin B and vitamin C. I think more data will come on that, but certainly stepping up the doses of these steroids created more problems than sorting out problems. But on the name of COVID, I think one could give any therapy, one could keep on giving higher and higher doses of Solimetrol or steroids, or giving IVIG, or even ECMO therapy. I think no patient was saved with the ECMO therapy except costing the patients a lot. Whatever required was that the early treatment with the guidelines, that is what helps the patient. Since we did not have any specific therapy for them. And another message I would like to give, that we already have admitted 2 COVID patients today at Mulchan Hospital. Means our governments have opened everything too fast, and on the form of financial front, where it is going to take us on the third wave, how much are the vaccination going to help, the time will tell.
Dr. Mangala, one question. In the cases you said where oxygen demand is increasing and you don't want to increase the dose of steroids, so can you give baricitinib here?
These are the alternatives to the steroids.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Dr. Prasad.
Sir, you
I
take
think
Dr. Mangala, sir.
No, 2 patients who receive baricitinib needs to be given with remdesivir, and the rule is days when the viral multiplication is going on. Although everybody gave remdesivir as and when the patient came, but whether it benefited, there was a question mark. Other drugs like Bevacizumab, I think it was given to two of our patients, both died of bleeding. So they were more of experimental therapies, but the standard therapy of steroid oxygenation, those who made it, those who survived longer, and those even who required 100% oxygen. One of our patients who was on ventilator for 3 weeks, and we have discharged this patient on this last Friday, and he was so sick that people wanted to come from Hyderabad, put up an ECMO machine and fly in to Hyderabad for lung transplantation. And now with his own lungs, this patient is stable on 1 liter of oxygen. That means we have to just tide over the crisis by maintaining them by ventilation, non-invasive ventilation, oxygenation, and the standard therapy. And if they survived and they made it, then they are recovering. Whether they are taking 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, most of the patients we discharge are on 1 liter of oxygen or they are off oxygen, and gradually their oxygen requirement is going down and they are maintaining on room air. That means the patients who made it are hopeful of with a similar lungs over a period of time, they are likely to be useful to the society. So,
Dr. Mangla, mainly paracetamol was mainly for diabetic patients.
No.
It is a steroids are contraindicated in diabetic patient. Paracetamol was only given in diabetic patient along with remdesivir. In the early stage.
Early stage, but very few patients were given. Even remdesivir had a question mark role. Even remdesivir was not sacrosanct, although it was given to all patients. The most important part was the steroids and the oxygenation. Whether remdesivir really helped, there is a question mark to that. But it was all the same, it was given to all patients whosoever came.
Dr. Mangla sir and Lalit, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude on behalf of Physicians Forum of India, and I would like
Dr.
Sir, please go ahead, Dr. Mangla sir.
Let me to ask one more. Sir, as you said, Dr. Prashad sir and Dr. Mangla, there is no vaccine as such in the vicinity. But are there antibodies formed after the treatment or when the patient is recovered?
No, sir. No, sir.
No. It's only the cellular immunity.
It is only the cellular immunity, the non-specific cellular immunity like water purity force. Anyone intruding has to be engulfed properly by phagocytes, macrophages, and then again the neutrophils which neutralize the whole thing. Nothing more than that, sir.
So about the platelets also, there was a role of platelets and people are given aspirin. So preferably it should be taken off.
Sir, again, something is saving you from thromboembolic phenomena of the COVID. On the other side, you have more of mucus invasion. So these are two sides to the same coin. So many things. The irony is that it saves from one and takes away from the other. Like,
खजूर से गिरे और तवे पे गिरेगा.
I would like Dr. P.K. Mangla sir to summarize this very important webinar for us. What should be the carry-home message for us, sir? Dr. P.K. Mangla sir.
Carry-home message for the mucormycosis, we understand it's a deadly illness, and most of the patients before the COVID, whenever we saw that most of our patients died, they were diabetic. But this time we did see that these patients of mucormycosis who presented with some eye symptoms, facial pain, anesthesia, and if they were detected early and given chemotherapy, because the sinus endoscopy and diagnosis was made as the ENT surgeons and the patients and their treating physicians were sensitized to this diagnosis. We have seen as and when this chemotherapy was given, the patients did well overall, unless
Can I add one point to what Dr. Mangla is saying? The more we see, the more we learn about these patients, so we are more confident of treating such patients in future.
Absolutely.
What I was trying to say earlier, as we thought that mucormycosis meant certain death, but it is not that. In spite of
Now we are getting
not available,
now we are getting
you see, we did save number of patients.
Precisely.
And we should be guarded about the steroids. I think message should be given that these self therapies and we are harming the patients more. Not only that, that they develop mucormycosis, the kind of, muscle weakness and the patient's proximal myopathy which the patients have developed, and those who have survived, it is taking a lot of time for them to get their muscle mass and muscle power, which is quite, troublesome to the patient.
A lot of neurological and psychological problems also, sir.
Thank you, Dr. P.K. Mangla, sir. Thank you, Lalit, for a wonderful presentation on mucormycosis. You covered almost, as Dr. P.K. Mangla, sir, said, every aspect of mucor, and Dr. P.K. Mangla, sir, wonderfully summarized it for us. There were a lot of questions, and certain things stood out which Dr. Mangla, sir, so beautifully summarized. Be careful about this disease. Take it very seriously. There is a very high mortality, although it is not incurable. We have some good drugs now available. They were in great shortage recently. The availability has improved, but we still be very, very vigilant about the presence, diagnose it early and treat it as early as possible. It is still a hugely treatable disease. Although it leaves behind lot of scars in the body, there are multiple ways of presenting the disease. We have to be careful diagnosing the disease. Now when we come to the end of this webinar, there are some people to thank.